everyone. Danny here today with part 2 of my conversation with Mr. Philip Quaintrell. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a wide range of topics. Everything from what his least favorite characters in the books are, mine as well, to what are the true chances of this becoming a TV series. And if it does become a TV series, what are his input into that? There's several other subjects that we talk. There's going to be at least one more section to this. In fact, there's going to be one more section to this, I know this, but let's jump into it. If you like my channel, please subscribe and enjoy the conversation. So do you feel, when you're writing the books, do you feel like an author creating something? Or do you feel more like a narrator watching a TV show and then narrating what's happening on the TV show?
Yeah, I feel more like the latter, for sure. I mean, if you read, especially at my action scenes, if you read those, you can really see that I'm writing through a lens. I'm not sort of like writing having seen all this. It's very much like my writer's eyes right behind the character, and you're seeing them move through the scene.
So do you have characters then that you hate and you wish weren't in the story?
There's no
not from a if they were in the storyline, but I hate this person and what they're doing to my friends, and so I wish they didn't, from that point of view.
The Crow was one who was particularly nasty. But
yeah.
He was like a love to hate kind of thing. He was a very intelligent villain.
Okay.
But probably Elijah, actually. You know, he was very frustrating as a villain because you could see the good in him, and we had seen the good in him. You know, in book all of book 4 and his struggle through 5 and 6. You know, that was probably the bit I didn't like the most, and also finding Maliath's voice through Elijah was hard, because Maliath, you know, was kind of in all the books, but he's called Maliath the Voiceless,
right?
And then as soon as you bring in obviously Elijah and their connection, he has a voice, and so I found it quite hard to figure out who Maliath really was and how he spoke and what fueled him. And you know, it's hard to put yourself into the mind of a being so ancient that he hasn't really got an age that you could attach to him.
Well, and he's been twisted so differently from the other dragons. He's the only dragon with as much hatred as he has. Dragons, from the viewpoint of your story, dragons are like good, noble creatures, you know. And then you've got Maliath, who's the complete opposite end of the spectrum. He's just been twisted until he's almost no longer a dragon, you know, psychically, I guess I would say.
Well,
mentally, emotionally.
When you read or listen to A Clash of Fates, you'll see there's more in there as well in the last book that details things that happened to him in his past. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that get listed. Of things that happened to him, and it's just sort of like through the ages, he's just had one bad thing happen to him after another, but he survives like Asher. He just keeps surviving and pushing on and pushing on. And yeah, you're right, that twisted him. So then it was easy finding the voice for Valanis, who was, you know, a bit of like a religious zealot, and then finding the voice for the Crow was quite fun because he was so intelligent, because he'd seen the future, and so he has this very lofty kind of, you know, he often says things like, this is not how I die, because he knows. And then getting to Elijah and Maliath, who kind of come as a pair, you know, there's never just one of them thinking or doing something, they're always together and they're always thinking together. That was probably my least favorite part, was just getting into their mindset and, you know, writing that struggle between the two, and also finding ways for them to be in sync.
See, for me with Elijah, it was more of I felt so sorry, and
I want there to be like a redemption, him to get redeemed and saved, to come up with a character that in the book I'm like, I absolutely hate this character, and I don't remember the name because it's been a while since, but I have to go back further in the series. There's that queen that captures the elf queen, and
The goddess.
pardon?
The goddess.
Yeah, and tortures her and puts her. She was a character that I hated.
And she got a pretty bad death too.
Yeah, she was not. And I agree with you. The Crow was kind of a love hate kind of, I hate the guy, but I'm enjoying hating the guy kind of a thing, and I'm glad.
And his backstory is not too different to Elijah's. You in book 4, you get all those ancient history sections where you read as him as a boy and a young man, and you realize in some ways he was quite an easy character to sympathize with. Even his motives. What I will say is, until you've read book 9, you don't know what's going on.
Well, and so Jonah told me, don't start on book 9 until you've got a lot of time to devote to it, because he ended up just in a day and a half reading the entire book beginning to end. Now, he was in Japan, and they were on lockdown, so he was able to do that. So he's read it a couple of times already, and he said, yeah, once you get started, you're not going to want to put this down and stop, and you're going to get really irritated if something comes and interrupts you, and you have to put it down and be like, you're going to go to bed at night, you're going to be laying there going, I can't sleep, I need to know what happens next, I can't sleep here, kind of a thing. Which I've had books like that where I'm like, honey, I'm going to go sleep in the guest room, because then I can put the audiobook on and fall asleep while I'm listening to it, kind of thing. That's the way I'll get to sleep. So I'm very much looking forward to it here, and curious to see the directions. Jonah said there's some more major surprises and twists in there that I have no clue of and won't see coming. Josh, he's my oldest, and he's reading it as well. So then we'll be able to actually have a conversation about it at that point in time. With that new big series that's coming out, is that going to be before The Crow, or is that going to have The Crow in it?
It'll be before him. Yeah.
It'll be before him. Okay, so we'll be
it'll be so the he was part of the Echoes order, which we know came out of the Janus. And I'm going back to a point where the Janus, the first wizards, basically.
Right.
I'm going back to a point where they are at their height of power. And the Dragon Riders are relatively young in terms of how long their order's been around. And you might remember there's a couple of segments here and there, they're very small, where the Andorrans are mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get to meet them and what they are and who they are and all of that ancient history. There's so much that happened in the past that I didn't want to get myself tied up in knots. I'll be honest, my original idea was to go back to the time of Atalan.
Okay.
And I was going to write his story about, the Dragon Riders versus Atalan and that whole conflict.
Right.
Except how that ends. You know exactly how that conflict ends. In fact, you read in one of the books, the prologue is Atalan basically, fleeing the dragons sort of thing.
And going into the new world that he had created, kind of for them to live on.
Yeah, like a safe haven sort of thing. Yeah, while everyone else runs into the wild moors. And you knew how that ended for him and for the Dragon Riders, and I thought, can I write a good story where everyone knows the ending already? I don't know if I can. I don't know if even I would be interested in that. It's not got a good ending, that particular story,
Right.
It doesn't end well for the protagonists or the antagonists. So I thought, actually, what might be more fun is to go back even further and flesh out what, the sort of more of the foundations of Verda,
So then you're probably not going to end up touching on the Crow then, because it'll be the similar situation with the Crow where we already know enough about him.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be fun to write.
We're going to be thousands of years before him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be big, and I know one of the main characters is going to be from under the water. So it's going to be like a soft introduction as well, this saga, to the other world that is, the merfolk.
Right.
Because I've started fleshing all of that out as well, and there's multiple races and civilizations all under the water, and things that are going on down there are just as exciting as what's happening on land.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, so I would love to, at some point after the next big saga, I'd love to write an underwater fantasy series.
I'd actually like to read that. Sounds quite fascinating and quite unique.
Yeah, well, I think there's a reason as well, because if you look around, there's not a lot of underwater fantasy series, and it's because they're very hard to write, because nothing is relatable. As soon as you go under the water, everything is different. So I think a lot of writers have probably shied away from it. And that's why, for me, it's further down the line, because I think I'll need time to really figure out. I've got, on my phone, I've got a note which is just full of questions that I need to answer before I can do anything in the underwater series. Once I've answered all those questions, I'll be able to start writing it. But even simple things, like, how do they travel, and how do they sleep, how do they drink, what do they eat, all the really simple things that you wouldn't think about in a fantasy book like the Echoes Saga. They're all actual talking points if it's underwater.
How do they talk through the water?
Yeah, how do they do anything? How do their eyes work? How do they, do they breathe like fish? Do they need to swim, or can they propel? Can they use magic? I've got like 50 million questions that I need to answer before I do that, which is why in the next big series, there's just going to be one character who is going to be like a soft introduction to that world, because that character will be on the surface as well as underwater.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I'm really excited about it, as you can tell. I can't wait to get stuck into that series, and there's definitely a part of my brain that is most comfortable when I'm writing as multiple characters in multiple places doing different things that they don't know about.
Unless they're all sitting down having a conversation, and you got to figure out who's saying what.
I hate that. Yeah. Those are the headache days. My wife used to come home from work, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, it's been a great day. It was a battle scene," and then she'd come home some days, and I'd be like this, and she would know that I'd been writing.
And from a reader standpoint, it's nothing more complicated than a conversation. From the writer standpoint, it's like, that's a lot more complicated than the battle, actually, to write.
Yeah, and they are, because you've not. So in book 9. When you get to it, there was a conversation that takes place between Inara and Gideon, and I wrote the entire conversation. It takes up the chapter, and then when I moved on a couple of chapters and I got back to them, I couldn't write them. I couldn't write their continued opinion on what they'd been talking about, and it stopped me. Like, I couldn't progress, and I realized their dialogue was backwards. As soon as I took their opinions and flipped them, so that they were each other's, I was like, oh, that makes more sense. I can write that. And then when I moved on, they had,
So you mentioned on one of your social media sites that there's the potential for a TV show. Is that an actual hopeful thing, or is that like an actual potential?
So I can't say too much.
Okay.
The option right has been sold. I've sold the option rights. So when you have something like a book and it's intellectual property, there are a multitude of rights that come with it. So, like there's the ebook rights and paperback rights and audio rights. So, for example, I've sold the audio rights to Podium. They produce the audio books for me. But there's also film and TV rights. And so I've sold the option to a production company in America who contacted me a couple of years ago.
Hopefully they will. So if they do decide to make a TV show out of it, will you have input on it, or do they just get to do what they want with it?
That is yet to be seen. The contract I've signed is pretty big and it was intensive, and it covers a whole bunch of things. There are clauses in there that suggest that I should have some input and be consulted on things, but ultimately the company will have the last say. So it'd be nice to be brought in and consulted on things for sure, but at the end of the day, I won't be the one spending millions putting it on screen. So I don't get the final say.
Well, as a fan of the book, if they do it, I would hope and pray that they keep the feel. It ruins it for me when I'm a book first, movie or TV show second kind of a guy. And there are some books that have been turned into like TV series, and there's enough of a difference between the TV series and the book that I have to pick and choose. Oh, that actually happened in the book. That didn't. But it follows the flavor well enough that I'm like, okay, I'm trying to think of the name of it. There's a Western series about a sheriff in Wyoming on Netflix that is based on a book series as well. And it's like that. One book in the series takes up 4 or 5 storylines in the TV show, but it maintains enough of the feel of it that as a fan of the book series, I can enjoy the TV show. And then there's other ones. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Harry Potter movies.
Is that because of how different they are to the books?
That's exactly the first couple movies I'm a fan of, but by the time, especially the final 2 movies, they Hollywood the book and lose the entire feel and everything, and lose everything that I love about that final book. So yeah, that would be my worry, is that they do that.
Yeah, I've seen the movies. I know what you mean. They sort of missed. There was a bit of magic, wasn't there, between the 3 of them? A kind of
well, magic, and his battle with Voldemort.
Oh, yeah,
is not a my magic is more powerful than your magic kind of a battle. It boils down to what he's been told all along. I understand love, you don't. I have love, you don't. I understand things about magic, you don't. So my magic doesn't have to be more powerful than yours, kind of a thing, by the time they get to the final scene, whereas it's more about the battle in the movie and less about that. So a different tangent. I'm just hoping that if it does become a TV show, they keep the flavor and the feel and don't change too much and spoil it, because I think this would make an amazing TV series if they did it the correct way.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it'd be quite easily adaptable. I mean, I've read the first 3 treatments that they've had written for the first 3 books, and I know that they're talking to some people, and I might have to go out to Los Angeles later this year or next year to meet some people. So there are things happening, and it is moving forward, but it's a lengthy process. You're talking big budget, TV
right.
or film. It's going to require a lot of money to take this from the page to the screen and be believable. I didn't spare anything with my imagination when I wrote it. So I think, I don't want them to mess anything up, and I don't want them to miss out on things. And it's one of those, it's also at the same time, you have to realize going from one medium to another, they're just, some things aren't translatable, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
But I like to think though that I have enough audience characters in there, because I know that sometimes when they translate books into TV and film, they'll invent new characters, won't they? So that the audience has someone to either relate to, or they can ask questions for them. You know, whereas I try to always have dialogue between characters that would inform the reader what was happening or what had previously happened.
Yeah. Well, and I know that I think of the Lord of the Rings. They had to do a lot of changes to make the movies, but I think that's one of the best jobs anyone's ever done of taking a book series and turning it into a movie. I mean, I read the Lord of the Rings when I was 11, 12 years old. It's a series I grew up with, that and The Hobbit, and loved that series. And I love the movies just as much as I love the books, because they did a really good job. There's a lot in those books that are left out in the movies, because it'd be what, a week-long movie if you included everything in the. I mean, you can't do
I
that.
think,
Changing the medium.
my biggest worry would be that they would cut out a character. That would be my biggest worry, that they would feel that the story was too complex, or they didn't feel like they could weave the story together in the same way that I did in the books. And so they cut out one of the characters completely. I know one of the things, I can't say too much, but one of the things that we have discussed briefly was like the potential of focusing on certain characters in season 1, and then picking up characters in season 2.
I can see them doing that and making that
Yeah,
work. Yeah,
that was something I thought would work as well. You know, you could easily leave out certain characters like Gideon and Galanor in season 1,
right.
and bring them in with Adalandra in season 2. You know what I mean? Like, because a lot of the time, the things in the books, the characters don't know about each other.
Right.
Which was, that was one of the fun things. I used to get really excited when I was writing them, when I was getting to a point where they were going to meet. That was always a really fun part, was bringing in these, like the first time Asher meets Gideon, that kind of thing. And I'd written them for 3 books, and they didn't know each other existed.
So was it been the same way, like the werewolf? I've lost his name.
Russell.
Russell, thank you. Yes, when Russell first appears in the book at the tavern, was that a surprise to you as well? All right, here's this guy that I didn't know existed before.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I loved walking into the pickaxe. If there was one thing I wish I could do, it was like have a real pickaxe. I'd love to actually have that, be able to walk into that tavern. That'd be so great.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it was great walking in there as the characters and meeting him. And yeah, the first, when they realized, when one of the characters realizes he's a werewolf, that was news to me. And at the time,
I was about to say, so you didn't know when he was first introduced that he was a werewolf at that point in time?
Yeah, I just knew he was a ranger, or an ex-ranger, when he had the tavern. And that was all I knew about him until I think Nathaniel and Asher were sat at the bar later on, and he serves them drinks. At that point, that just kind of happened, and I thought that was fun because I hadn't intended to put werewolves into the story. But I've then really enjoyed writing Russell's story into, he's been sort of steadily woven into the main plot.
It was a surprise to have a werewolf. The dragons were less of a surprise, because you see elves, you see dwarves, you see dragons interact. The werewolf was a surprise to me, because usually, werewolves are tied in with vampires, and they've almost got like their own genre in fantasy. You don't typically see them with elves and dwarves, interacting.
I just didn't want to limit myself. I think I wanted as broad a world as I could make. And I didn't want vampires. I have my own version of vampires, which you probably only briefly heard of in book 2, but they're called Vorska. one of the characters, I think it's Glane, one of the rangers, he explains that his family were killed by the Vorska, and that's how he met Asher. And they will come up in more detail in Asher's books that I'm writing now. But I do have my own version of vampires. It's that they're, it's, traditionally a vampire can't come out in daylight.
Right.
In the Vorska in Verda, if they come out into daylight, you can see their true form. They look hideous and monstrous. But at nighttime, they can look like us. So that's kind of the weird parallel, I suppose. But they do feed on blood. They have but it's their tongue, not fangs. I wanted to have vampires in there, but I also didn't want to have vampires.
Right.
Maybe that was my line. I don't know. But I also quite liked the idea of a being that does feed off the blood of humans and things. But like I say, they'll come up in the Ranger archives.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Are you going to do, so you're going to do the Ranger archives, you're going to do the big, long, epic fantasy. Are you going to do a storyline like the Ranger archives that focuses on, like, say, the Dragorn, or?
I've got no plans to. I've tried not to plan too far ahead because I don't know where my imagination's going to go.
I thought you said you knew what the next 10 years look like.
Yeah, so the next 3 Ranger books, and then a 6 or more for the next.
I guess that is, yeah, that's.
Yeah,
it's actually one of the things that surprised me. So I've got a couple of different authors, and your books are not short books by any stretch of the imagination. They're not short books. And typically when I finish a book of the size of your books and I'm waiting for the author to finish the next book, it's a considerably longer wait. You're pretty prolific and able to produce yours fairly quickly, which is even more surprising considering how complex they are.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think my nurse training definitely lent me some discipline when it comes to work.
Okay.
I write 10,000 words a week. It used to be 15,000, but I have 2 small kids now, so realistically, I shortened it. So I write 2,000 words a day, Monday to Friday. I sit at my desk and I get that done. There's no kind of going for long walks and thinking about things so much anymore. I now sit at my desk and inspiration knows where to find me. And
so are you like Stephen Pressfield then? He talks about he has his block of time when he sits and writes. And he sits and he writes and he doesn't worry about whether it's good, it's bad, this is when I write. I'm writing, and then later I'll go back and look at it and decide if it was good or bad. Are you like that, or?
I don't even do that. I don't have multiple drafts. I don't. I only write what I want to be in the book. I can't put it any simpler than that. I know what the story is, and that's all I can write. I can't write multiple variations and multiple drafts. And my editor is always right behind me, so I don't give him the whole book. I give him a few chapters, and while he's editing those, I'm progressing, and then he comes back to me with the edits, and I give him the new chapters plus the old ones, so he's got a clean slate. He starts again, and I keep moving forward. So by the time I get to the end of the book, I'm actually very close to being able to just release the book because the editing has been almost complete. And once the editor is finished, I then go through myself from beginning to end. And I go through it, I guess, from a point of view of, are there any mistakes that I need to correct? And also, am I happy with all the story as it is? And often I'm not one of those authors that will cut out thousands of words. I know authors who will, by the time they finish editing, they'll remove 15 to 20,000 words. If anything, I add somewhere between 3 and 10,000 words in my edit, just because I think of new bits, I add new bits, I extend some dialogue. and yeah, because of the pace that I move through the book, sometimes I do miss things. So then I'll realize that happened a lot with book 9. That's the biggest book. And I was moving at some speed with that. And so I got to the end, and as I was reading through bits, I won't say because I don't want to spoil it for you, but there were bits that I would read and go, oh, this never comes up again. And it's not that it needed to. Like there's one thing I'm thinking of that didn't need to come back up again. The book could have finished and you'd never have thought about it. But I needed to put something in about that thing. Do you know what I mean? Like then I ended up writing the
so
whole.
You as the viewer needed to know how it ended.
Yes, yeah. And as
You
soon
as the author had to write that.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. So me as a reader is like, I want to know what happens to this. And then the author in me goes, oh. So, it works like that in my edit. I'm very fast. I try to get 2 books out a year.
See, the nice thing about that is your audience doesn't have time to lose interest. I've got an author in mind that I'm thinking of. His book series was an absolute favorite of mine, and all I can guess is he reached a point with the story where he can't figure out where it's going from here.
Okay.
Because it's been 3 or 4 years since the last book has come out, if not longer than that. And now if he was to release that book, I'd almost have to go back and restart the entire series to get back into it, because I've fallen out of that series and fallen into other book series, like yours there. And your audience doesn't really have that chance. The next book is coming, and so,
yeah, I mean, I've got the biggest delay is happening right now, because Podium Audio and I have agreed that we will release the ebook, paperback, and audiobook all on the same day, and we will do that going forward. So
I actually saw that. Yeah.
Did you see it? Yeah. So that means that this first release, Court of Assassins, which is the first book in the Ranger Archives, there's a delay on that because I'll finish that in October and deliver that to them. They then need a few months to get production complete on that and get it out for pre-order in the January.
So that was something I was curious about. Is that how long it takes them to produce an audiobook then?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take Stephen Brand that long. When you watch the interview, I actually ask him about it. It can take him a couple of weeks to get the book out on record, but it then has to go. It then goes to the producers and the directors on the Podium side of things, and they listen to it. And sometimes they might go back and ask him to just re-record a certain sentence or paragraph or dialogue. The one thing that I always think of, bless him, he did. I think he wrote. He narrated book 1, and I can't remember exactly how it came about, but I say Corcaneth, where the mages learn magic,
right?
And he had pronounced it Corcaneth.
So he must have changed it, because in the audiobook it's Corcaneth, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so the first version is Corcaneth, and then they said to me, do you want him to re-record all of the Corcaneth lines? And I was like, yeah, I think I do.
So then that answers my question from earlier about whether you do. So that the pronunciations in the book are the way that in your mind they should be pronounced then.
I mean, I'm not too thingy about it. Like I said earlier, people can sort of pronounce it anyway they like. What I put on my website is how I pronounce them.
Right.
I think when it came to the narration, I just thought, the narration is as close as it's going to be to how I think and how I hear it. So I thought I wanted it to be like that. I mean, it's not all like that. I haven't heard all the audiobooks. I know he pronounces Dorian. I think he has an I in there. I think he pronounces it Dorian instead of Dorian.
I have to go back and re-listen. I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah, there's a couple of bits here and there that that slip through, and it's okay. They sound great, and people know who's who and who you're talking about. And I just love his voice. whenever he's reading
Now
it.
you've got me curious. I'm gonna have to go back and is it Doran Heavy Belly or Dorian Heavy Belly?
I think he says Dorian, and I didn't twig that, you see, until something like book 4 or 5, because they always send me a copy, and I don't have time to go through the entire audiobook. Sometimes I'll listen to bits of them. I genuinely, I just quite like listening to Stephen Brand say, by Philip C. Quaintrell. I just like hearing him say that. But I think I remember I did skip once through to a chapter that Doran was in. And I remember thinking, oh, it sounds like he's saying Dorian. But,
sometimes it can be the accent too. I've got a book I just finished listening to, and the main character's in it name is Conrad. And every time the narrator said Conrad, he'd have someone call out Conrad. It sounded like he was saying comrade.
Oh, okay.
And it's set in more of a medieval kind of a setting.
Oh, so it's very easy.
And so when they'd say comrade, it would throw me a little bit, but it was his pronunciation of Conrad is what it was. And when you listen to it closely, you could hear he's actually saying Conrad. He's not saying comrade. He is saying Conrad, but it's just when you're listening to it in the moment, it comes across that way because of his accent, kind of a thing. So
yeah. I mean,
even Rand's voice, I don't know.
Stephen Brand's accent is just so nice to listen to. He's got such a great voice. We're having a chat in a week or so over Zoom. I'm looking forward to catching up with him again, because I think he's just finished A Clash of Fates, recording it. So it'd be great to catch up with him and see what he thought of the whole series. But yeah, he's a great narrator. He's got a great voice for fantasy. He's got that. I think he was born in Scotland, but then he might have lived in London and Africa even for a while. And he's got he can't really tie his accent down.
Yeah,
it just sounds great for fantasy.
Yeah, he does. He really, and the narrator with an audiobook can make such a difference. Sometimes Sword in the Storm. Can't think of the author. David Gemmell, Sword in the Storm. You've got the Regante, who, when you read the book, come across as very Scottish. And then you've got the people of Stone, who are their enemy, who come across as very Romanesque. And so with both of them, you picture swarthier style warriors. The narrator they picked for the book was a female narrator, which is okay. But when she does any of the voices for any of the people for Sword in the Storm, she gives them a very French accent and almost an effeminate sound to it. So in the audiobook, they change from being Romanesque to being Three Musketeers.
Oh, okay.
But Three Musketeers who fight in shield walls with gladiators, and it loses it, and it can't do the audio version of that, specifically because they chose the wrong narrator. She's a good narrator. I've listened to other books she's narrated. She just wasn't good for that book.
Well, you'll be happy to know then that Stephen Brand's coming in to do the Ranger Archives.
Yeah, you said that earlier.
Yeah, I'm really chuffed that he's sticking with it. It's almost like his voice is his Verdaverse. He's like speaking it. It's great.
Well, and as an audiobook listener, you always hate that when a narrator gets switched partway through a series, because they become the voice of those characters in your head, and then they get a new narrator and it's a different voice, and I don't feel like I'm listening to the same book anymore at all, which I was really happy to see that he was there with like all 9 books, and he's going to be there with it. And hopefully he sticks with it going forward, because he is a really good narrator.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that second part of my conversation with Mr. Philip Quaintrell, as much as I enjoyed actually having the conversation, and it was quite an enjoyable conversation. There's going to be a part 3, which I will post again next week. And then after that, I'm going to get back into my review of the books, picking up with Mr. Quaintrell's series. I've only done reviews of the first 6 books. I'm relisting the book 7 right now, and I will be posting my thoughts on that book when it's nice and fresh in my head. But for now, if you like my channel, please hit the subscribe button. Questions, comments, feedback, it's what the comment section's for, people. Put it in there. But most importantly, no matter what else you do today, make sure that today you listen to at least one really good audiobook. And yes, once again, done a lot of recommending of this author, Mr. Philip C. Quaintrell and the Echoes Saga. Thank you.